I'm incredibly excited to have you here. And I think John may have also already joined. Just a few words of introduction. Basically, what we're doing right now, we already did we wanted to do initially already last week, which is a general discussion on biohacking for COVID-19 and beyond for health extension. But then Steve's presentation was kind of like exciting enough. And then he was followed by Amy Prowl that we dedicated a whole slot just to both of their presentations. I'm going to share that here. And then we said, okay, why don't we really focus this session on health extension biohacking. So without further ado, Creon has shared with me and a few others here in this group already his pretty extensive health extension doc. Creon, are you okay with me sharing that with the group, or would you prefer not to?
No, I'm absolutely fine with you sharing that with the group. I'm unfortunately didn't prep well enough to have, I wanted to have some before and after pictures of me. I mean, part of the reason that I think I'm being asked to talk about this is because roughly coincident with my relationship with Allison, which is, I don't know how many years we've been hanging out. Was it 5 yet? Yeah. Anyway, so around
probably, but then you're also on Benjamin Button o'clock, so I don't know. Yeah, okay, well, it's hard to say.
Yeah. So what happened is about roughly 5 years ago. So, okay, what I'm going to talk about is a personal journey that I've gone through in terms of transformation of my health, but also, you know, as is the way of so many of us, it's been coupled with a giant excursion into learning about new things, learning about metabolism, diet, immunology, and then more recently, the food system and regenerative agriculture, and then back into immunology, virology. For obvious reasons. So, but the thing is that what happened was I got married, and I thought that meant that I was like obviously a great catch. But after being married for a fairly short time, my wife was like, you know, you are really too heavy. And I saw this picture of me at my wedding, and I had this big belly. I had no idea. My self-image was actually totally different. But I've been putting on weight for decades. And so I actually looked into it and found out that I was technically in the classification of obese. This was before I met Allison, actually, maybe 2 years before. And so I became very concerned. And my wife, who had she's always been relatively slender and has had a history of weight loss dieting, you know, like she'll get a little heavier and then she'll diet and she'll take off weight. And she's like good at weight loss, you know. So she put me on the standard kind of thing. Low fat, lots of exercise. And, you know, I did drop some weight, but it was a pain in the ass. I couldn't eat. I didn't like what I was eating. And I was, you know, running and going to the gym and all this stuff, which I really don't like that much. And so it didn't really stick. And then about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I chanced upon this TED Talk by Peter Attia called "What If We're Wrong About Diabetes." It's linked in my doc. It's one of the first links, and I think this talk is now probably at least 7 years old, and it really profoundly affected me. The guy practically breaks down in tears several times during the talk. He's an MD, if you're not familiar with him, and he's a really big proponent now in this sort of low carb community and the keto community, as well as general health. And he's an amazing physician who has a really great podcast, which I've listened to pretty religiously up until recently, where I sort of feel like I've moved beyond what he has to say. I think he's kind of stuck, frankly, in some thinking that maybe was state of the art 7 years ago, but perhaps isn't anymore. And also being an MD, there's certain standards of care and certain things they can't actually say without getting in a certain amount of trouble. So, you know, I do have sympathy for him. But anyway, I listened to Attia's talk on what if we're wrong about diabetes, and basically saying, you know, well, I'll let you watch the talk. I don't want to summarize it, but I will say this. At the same time, my father was getting quite sick with diabetes. He'd had it for a while and it had been getting worse and worse. And at that point, he was basically going blind and getting weak and increasing his insulin. And he was a doctor too, and he was in his 80s at this point. And so he knew what this meant, and he was not happy about it. But he, being a rather straight-laced physician, was just following the guidelines and doing what his endocrinologists told him. And they basically told him to take drugs, take insulin, and try to cut out sugar. And while at the beginning of his diabetes, he actually made a line of foods like tomato sauce and spaghetti sauce and things like that were low sugar, and he manufactured them and he tried to sell them. He basically wasn't super successful in that, and eventually kind of gave up and just was getting so sick that he figured he would eat what he wanted and enjoy the remainder of his life. And I sat there over the next couple of years and just watched him die rather miserably. And so that really put the fear of God in me. Like, I did not want to go down this path. I did not want to do what he did. And so I hadn't been losing weight with this kind of typical low, eat less, move more paradigm that the medical establishment tries to push. And so I started searching, and I ran into the very low carb, high fat diet people, the ketogenic diet people. And I started to experiment with that. And I had dramatic results. I immediately shed like 10 pounds and kept losing weight. And then as I got more adept at it and learned how to cook and learned how to eat and learned how to shop and learned how to eat at restaurants and not violate the constraints and keep all sugar out of the diet pretty much, including fructose, and keep most carbs out of the diet, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I could lose weight and gain strength and feel great all the time and basically eat as much as I want, as long as I didn't eat carbs. So I became kind of a zealot about this, and I started promoting it to all of my friends. I lived at the embassy, Allison's community as well. And so I got a lot of my friends, this was maybe 3-4 years ago, I got a lot of my friends to start doing this. They all had pretty good results. Some of my friends lost 60 or 100 pounds, not at the embassy, but at work, doing this. I mean, it's dramatic what some people can do if they restrict carbs, but just other than that, eat ad libitum, meaning as much as you want, especially if it is high fat. There's all this discussion about protein versus fat and what the optimum ratios are. So I'll just say that there's a lot to be learned there. There's a lot that's been written about it. I not only have this document.
What do you think? Because I know that there's a lot of controversy about it.
Well, what I think is that it's kind of a lot of this stuff is individual. Like, there's no one size fits all, but I mean, hundreds of thousands of people have done this kind of thing, lost weight, kept it off, stabilized their energy, and improved their health. And if they're diabetic, have gotten completely off of medications by doing this. So this does work for a lot of people. Now, in terms of the optimum, let me just state my current opinion. My current opinion is most people do not need any carbohydrates at all in their diet. Carbohydrates are not an essential nutrient, in spite of the fact that they put them in there as one of the 3 macros: protein, carbs, and fat. You actually don't need carbs at all. And this has been shown, with experiments, not the kind of experiments that are easy to do anymore, but they have been done over the past century, and the results are pretty compelling. So anyway, the optimum, so let's say you're going to eliminate carbs, and most of your macronutrients are going to be fats and proteins. And then there's the question of what's the balance. So I'll tell you first for me, and then what I think the general principle probably is. First thing is, it depends on you and to some extent your preferences and your results. Also, I think in general, there's 2 things to say. One is that as one gets older, and I'm now 60, okay? And as one, 60. As one gets older, the basic idea is you need more protein as you get older, especially if you want to keep up your muscle mass and your muscle strength, which tends to decrease once you reach a certain age if you don't actively maintain it. And one of the ways to actively maintain it is to increase protein. Another way to actively maintain it is to do strength training, powerlifting or something like that, or isometrics or Bikram yoga or something that's like extremely exertion, but for a short period of time, exertion to failure, basically, or as close as you can do to that. That's what signals your muscles to grow, not just repetitive, lightweight jogging and stuff like that. That's fine if you're young to maintain, but if you actually want to grow muscle, you need to kind of stress to failure. Anyway, and same with bone density. Now, so more protein as you get older is a general thing for most people. Now, there's also this thing that if you're on a very high fat diet and you're restricting carbs and proteins, you will lose a lot of weight because you will start to get into fat burning mode. And that means that, especially if you fast occasionally when you're on a high fat diet, you're in fat burning mode. So you will start immediately burning your own body fat, especially if you're fasted. And for some people, they only have to be fasted overnight. For some people, they might have to be fasted for 16 hours. For some people, they might have to be fasted for a longer period. Some people might actually be burning body fat while they're burning dietary fat. It's kind of not clear exactly what's going on there, and it's probably not the same for everybody as far as I understand. But once you're in fat burning mode, you can burn a lot of fat. So if your goal is to lose fat, you probably want to restrict protein because you will preferentially produce glucose from protein rather than burning fat if you have a lot of protein and if you're carb restricted. So my experience was I stayed on the really high fat, protein restricted, carb restricted diet till I got kind of near my goal weight. And then I just started increasing protein to the extent that I wanted it. Like I wasn't a huge fan of eating a ton of fat and no, muscle meat and stuff like that. So I started adding back in the more protein rich broths and meats and things and fishes. And my weight was stable. And then with a tiny bit of exercise, and I mean a tiny bit, like this was maybe over the last 2 years, once a week. I used to do once a week weightlifting to failure on several different muscle groups. And I mean like 1 or 2 reps only with the highest maximum weight I could do where I failed. And then later on, I just got into doing maybe every other day, some push-ups and some sit-ups to failure. And that has, as Allison can tell you, my body has transformed. Like, it's just shocking to me. I'm a completely different person. I'm at optimal weight. I have all my blood markers are pretty much optimal. All my triglycerides and LDL particle sizes and inflammatory markers and you name it has gone into the young person realm. And my body is more, I'm in better shape. I mean, I was at this party. I don't mean to be a jerk here and boast, but I'll just tell you.
Can you tell us on a normal day, what's the kind of like, what's your daily schedule like? What do you eat? What supplements do you take? And
yeah, I'll tell you that. I'll tell you that stuff. That's all in this document. And I don't want to be this all about the N=1 Creon experiment because, but I'll tell you, not only have I put a lot of my friends on this kind of regimen and watched them transform, but in my reading and in my learning, what I've learned is that this is pretty much the cutting edge. Like, this should be front page news, okay? The idea that you can reverse diabetes and reverse obesity and reverse metabolic syndrome and reverse cardiovascular disease even, and all kinds of other things, probably decrease dramatically your risk of cancer, Alzheimer's, autoimmune disease. The fact that you can do all this by adopting a low carbohydrate and low inflammatory lifestyle, and that's sort of another subtlety, eliminating certain things that are inflammatory in most people, particularly so-called vegetable oils, which are really industrial seed oils, which is a whole other thing. But anyway, I was going to tell a good story about being at a party. I will do that, yeah. But anyway, the fact that you can reverse these chronic diseases, which are like now infecting maybe the wrong now, occurring in the majority of Americans and people in other developed nations and causing things like all these comorbidities that cause people to die from COVID, as well as the collapse of our healthcare system. The fact that you can reverse all this stuff in a rather simple way and eating food that's actually really tasty should be front page news. And I went to my doctor, who's a rather progressive doctor and has helped me through a lot of this stuff. And I was like, Dr. Gardner, why doesn't everybody know this? And well, first of all, I told him what I'd done, and he was like, "Oh, that's great, Creon. I've reversed obesity and diabetes in 100 or more patients by restricting carbohydrates." And I was like, "Well, why isn't this front page news?" And he was like, "Oh, Creon, that's very cute. You know why it isn't front page news. There's no money in it. There's no money in a cure for a chronic disease that gets people off of medication and out of the hospital and out of the medical system just by making some simple alterations." So this is a whole thing that we don't have to go into right now. We have in other sorts of foresight salons. But the question of the incentives and the industrial opposition. Anyway, okay. So I'll tell the story about the party, and then I will tell some next level stuff. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna be ending soon, and we can go back and have
No,
deeper
go for
discussion.
it. We're just
Oh,
already connecting for the discussion.
oh,
Don't let yourself get distracted.
okay.
We'd
So the
love to hear
story
the
about
story
the
about the
story about
party.
the.
We'd love to hear your daily routine, and we'd
All
love to
right.
hear
Okay.
the next level shit. Go for
All right.
it.
Cool. All right. So the story about the party is the story about the party is that yeah, I was recently at a party at the Sandbox House, this sort of community that was down here in Palm Springs for a while, um, and these were all like 30 somethings and like some of them were really athletic, and we were in the hot tub and they were like, man, how old are you? You are ripped. And I was like, oh shucks, but I mean, that was weird to me to have a bunch of 30-year-old athletes tell me that I looked really good. And so, I mean, I'm kind of embarrassed to say that, but what I want to say is I know this is not just me. People have, by the tens or hundreds of thousands, have transformed themselves. If you look online, I'm sure many of you have, you will see all these people who, using basically carbohydrate restriction, have dropped 100, 150, even more than that, and look like completely new people. And it's interesting because unlike a diet, it's more like a lifestyle. Like, you're not actually restricting the how much you eat. You're just restricting what you eat and when you eat, possibly. That's what Peter Attia points out. He says there's three axes you can manipulate with your diet. You can restrict how much you can manipulate how much you eat. You can manipulate what you eat, and you can manipulate when you eat. And it's like you can, if you grab any two of those, you can transform yourself. And I maintain that grabbing what you eat and when you eat is easier than trying to control how much you eat. We all know that caloric restriction will do various things, but it's then you're hungry all the time. Who wants to be hungry all the time? Being hungry, the interesting thing is, if you control what you eat, particularly by restricting carbohydrates, then controlling when you eat isn't such a big deal, because you're not hungry when you're in a fasted state because you have fat to burn. And then once you're in that situation where you're controlling what you eat, and hence you have control over when you eat because you don't get hungry and you don't crash if you don't eat for a few hours, now you're sort of automatically on caloric restriction if you want it. So like I do, Allison and I sometimes go to these festivals together, and for various reasons, I don't want to eat during the festivals. And so I take that as an opportunity to fast for a couple of days. And it doesn't bother me, because once you're in a fat adapted state, you just don't get hungry, even for an extended fast of, say, 48 hours or something like that. At least that's been my experience. Now, okay, we talked about the party. Now we're going to talk about the what
Daily regimen, including
daily regimen. Daily
supplements.
regimen is coffee and sparkling water until noon. And so no food from dinner the night before till noon the next day. And then at noon, I eat whatever I want that's low carb. So usually I eat meat and some eggs, usually mostly egg yolks, poached, maybe a meat and egg bowl with some sauces that I make. Sometimes other things, tinned fish, sometimes nuts, although I'm kind of cutting back on nuts now because there's a lot of omega-6 in most nuts, as well as a certain amount of carbs. Leftovers, and then, but as much as I want for lunch, sometimes like 6 egg yolks and a big pile of meat and some sauce and maybe some other things. And then for dinner, it's kind of fancier versions of the same, like steak or sliders with sauces. I'm really into sauces now. I've gotten to be I can cook now better than restaurant food. Like, I've ruined restaurants for my wife and I, because it's like I get the highest quality stuff and I make it fresh, and it tastes super good and it's super healthy, and it's inexpensive, and it's like, why go out? I mean, at these poor restaurants, they're going to reopen, and then there's going to be all these people who've taught themselves how to cook during the lockdown, and they're going to be still in trouble even after the doors are open. Okay, I think we need to open some keto restaurants. I mean, that has got to be the next big thing in fine dining, in my opinion. And because actually people don't even understand how good high fat, low carb food can taste. It is astonishing. Roast turkey. I mean, you name it. It's like all the comfort food minus the mashed potatoes. And then if you have the stomach for it, you can use, cauliflower and other things to substitute. Another really key thing, and then so now let's get into some beyond. Creon, yeah. So I finally said, so yeah. So it's like basically 2 meals a day, meat and eggs and oil and sauces and maybe some asparaguses or things like that, and fasting 16 hours, so from 8 p.m. till noon the next day. And I've been doing that for a couple of years now, and it is really, really working. And other people not so much. My wife likes to have breakfast, so she has a little bit of almond flour pasta, which is fairly low carb, and some flavored olive oils and things like that, or maybe some leftovers. So, she does 3 meals a day and she's fine. I do 2 meals. She's younger than me. I do 2 meals a day, and that totally works for me. And sometimes 1 meal a day. But I have a little trouble on 1 meal a day every day. Some people that works fine, and allegedly that's even better. So as you probably know, the next level stuff. Okay, there's 3 next level things I want to talk about. One is autophagy. I know that many of you are familiar with that. We'll just go to the basics. The next is inflammatory compounds and how to control them. And then maybe the next might be the connection to the food system. Okay, Allison, briefly? All right. So there's some people that I learned. I mean, I just learned this by listening to people who know about it. Dr. Sachin Panda, Dr. Walter Longau, Dr. Guido Kromer. These are people who are sort of pioneers in intermittent fasting. And here's the deal. Your body has 2 different modes that it can be in. In fact, every eukaryotic cell has 2 different modes it can be in metabolically. Even yeast, this sort of primordial eukaryote. When nutrition is plentiful, the organism grows. It increases in size and in numbers. It reproduces, it expands, it produces more cells, more tissues, more progeny. And then when nutrition is scarce, the organism doesn't do those things. When nutrition is scarce, the organism goes into a conservation mode. Now, the organism, if nutrition is scarce or actually non-existent, if there's no food, if it's times if it's lean times, famine times, the organism still has evolved to survive during those times, within limits, of course. And so what happens when nutrition is scarce is the cell still needs all the molecules that are necessary to synthesize all the tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of compounds that are synthesized by a cell. And it still needs the raw materials to make all those molecules to stay alive. And it finds those raw materials by scavenging, preferentially, when hunger first starts, it scavenges damaged molecules. We have specialized mechanisms that go around inside of every cell, find misfolded proteins, misoxidized molecules, mismethylated, cross-linked, all sorts of different damage that can occur that's related to aging damage, okay, recurs to molecules. Well, when you're in a fasted or hungry or starving state, your cells scavenge those damaged molecules, bring them to the, they're called phagosomes or lysosomes. There's various cellular organelles that are involved in this complicated process, proteasomes, and they digest these damaged molecules, breaking them into sugars, amino acids, and all the raw materials that you would normally get from nutrition. And then they resynthesize new molecules at a reduced rate because you're kind of at a reduced metabolic rate when you're starving, and you're scavenging damaged molecules and using the damaged molecules broken into bits to provide the raw materials that you need to make fresh molecules. So this is fasting, right? And this is autophagy, self-eating. Now, that is only half of the equation, though. Eventually, food comes back, right? The spring comes, or you break your fast, or the tribe wanders into a place where the game are to be found. And then you start eating again. And now that your body shifts into growth mode again and reproductive mode again. And now it goes on a massive rebuild to replace all the stuff that it kind of cannibalized, but it rebuilds with fresh, new, undamaged molecules. So this cycling of hunger and feeding over presumably much longer periods than we are used to. Like nobody in the modern world is used to going for weeks or even days without eating, unless maybe they're very sick, okay? Which is another interesting thing to consider, is that when you get very sick, you lose your appetite. What's that all about? But anyway, nobody these days, no human cycles like this. We don't even cycle our pets like this. But in the natural world, everything cycles like this. There are lean times and there are times of plenty, and we've adapted to leverage both to the organism's advantage, where in the lean times, you scavenge the damaged molecules, and then in the times of plenty, you rebuild fresh molecules. And so the idea is that this is probably one of the reasons, this is probably a technique that may improve lifespan. It certainly seems to improve health span and quality of life for a lot of us. And it will be very interesting to see if there were any studies, I'm not sure there are any, on long duration intermittent fasting and lifespan and health span in various organisms. Doesn't seem that hard to do in, say, mice. I know there have been caloric restriction studies, but in terms of the intermittent fasting, as far as I know, we still really don't know what the optimal schedule is. Like, I do 16 hours of fasting and 8 hours eating window every day, and then occasionally I do a longer fast every few weeks or months. Maybe, I have no idea if 16-8 really is optimal. It's just easy. Maybe it would be optimal to do a week-long fast every year. I have no idea. But we need to have chemical assays that can reliably and quantitatively characterize the degree of autophagy that's going on. And then we need to do some kind of mass citizen science big data thing with people doing different amounts of intermittent fasting, different schedules, and then testing themselves, and then tracking and seeing what their biomarkers are in terms particularly of whatever the biomarkers are for autophagy versus senescence. Because autophagy kind of can reverse senescence. So there's a whole connection here to longevity. It's like, if we can make drugs that turn on autophagy and then turn it on and off at will, that might be useful. I'm sure somebody's working on this with startups. I'm sure there's lots of money in it. Once again, if you can just do it with diet, or actually anti-diet, because when I'm talking about diet, I don't really mean like what you eat. I mean what you don't eat. So again, it's one of these things where I'm kind of a little bit wary of tech hype, because I think that if we just go into the archaic revival mode and we turn backwards and we look at our ancestors and what they had to deal with and what they had to evolve to optimize around, we might find the answers that we seek without necessarily a lot of drugs and tech. Although I'm all for drugs and tech if they do the job. I think that the Trimx trial is very exciting. And maybe, do I have 5 more minutes or should I quit, Allison?
Do 5 more minutes on the last two, or whatever you want to cram in there.
Okay, well, the last thing I wanted to just say is I think there's another thing besides carb restriction and intermittent fasting, which is less certain in terms of what's the optimal there, and perhaps more variable person to person. I think there's another thing that that is underplayed mostly, but is getting more and more press. And I have links to all these things in my long document, and as well as links to YouTube playlists, which are where I learned a lot of this stuff from like really state-of-the-art doctors and biochemists. And that is, there has been a titanic increase over the last 50 years or so in the use of what the industry likes to call vegetable oils, but where they don't actually come from vegetables. They come from seeds that are treated with various rather high intensity industrial processes. So I'm not talking about avocado oil and olive oil, which are technically from fruits, but I'm talking about soybean oil, corn oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, canola oil. These are extremely cheap. And they are arguably and apparently highly toxic to humans. And they were not only promoted by the food and medical establishments in form of margarine and salad oils, so-called salad oils and things like this. They're found everywhere, and they're found everywhere because they're cheap and they have allegedly a long shelf life, although that might be because they come pre-rancid from the factory, that they have such a long shelf life. It's like they don't go rancid, they start rancid. Anyway, and it's associational, but a whole bunch of degenerative diseases have been just skyrocketing in the population, as has the consumption of these high omega-6 oxidized industrial seed oils over the last 50 years. And there's a lot of evidence now, I think, accumulating that removing them from your diet will certainly do no harm and may do an awful lot of good. So I think that aside from cutting out sugar and carbs, particularly refined carbs and simple carbs, which are inflammatory, then cutting out seed oils is probably the next thing to try. And then the third thing is that there's certain plants. I know there's all these people who are pushing a plant-based diet, and I am not one of them. Let's just put it that way. And in particular, here's the thing to know about plants. Plants can't run, plants can't fight, and plants can't hide. And plants don't want to be eaten any more than any other organism wants to be eaten. So what do plants do to protect themselves from being eaten? They make toxins that sicken and poison and discourage whatever it is that normally would want to eat them. They make insecticides, they make fungicides, they make poisons for any mammals. There are many plants, and you can take a plant-eating cow or something like that, and it will sooner starve than eat these plants because it knows in its genetic heritage that this is a toxic plant. And humans don't seem to really care that much about it. I mean, we know that there are certain toxic plants, but people are just loading themselves with nightshades, tomatoes and eggplants and beans and all this stuff, which is like, it's funny. The doctors don't know it, but the veterinarians and the botanists all know it very well. These plants are loaded with toxic compounds, lectins, oxalates, isothiocyanates, and all kinds of other things. Alkaloids, that in small quantities get us high and in large quantities kill us. I mean, I would say, plant meat is food and plants are medicine. That's kind of how I'd summarize it. And so it's all about what you eliminate from your diet. And then once you are healthy and optimal, you can start adding stuff back in and see how you feel. That's my basic recommendation. And I think that millions of people are falling in line on this. Creon Levit, over and out.
Great. Amazing. Thank you. You have a lot of questions in the chat, so I would direct you to the chat now to answer a few of them. And then we're going to open up a big bucket of more discussion and, let's say, disagreements in the discussion. For now, I'm super excited to have John Furber join. And John, you're vegetarian or even vegan, so I'm super looking forward to the flip side of Creon's argument just now. It's a great segue. John, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to post more info on you in the chat.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. I have some opening remarks, then I have a couple of PowerPoints that I mashed together from presentations last year, and I'll rush through the non-relevant parts and Terry on the more relevant parts.
I can't see the slide yet. Are you sharing it yet?
Not yet. I'm going to make some opening remarks first. So I made a few notes, and I think in addition to diet and exercise, which are very important, even though Creon's diet is different than mine, I think sleep is very important. And I'm going to suggest that people wear earplugs and a blindfold when they sleep so they're not interrupted. And also, they can put these blue blocking glasses on a couple hours before bedtime, and it helps the brain to slow down and get ready for sleeping. And if you get up in the middle of the night, just use a dim red night light. Don't turn on bright lights. Let your brain think it's still sleeping. Those glasses are by Honeywell UVEX. They're on Amazon for only $10. They're industrial safety glasses. They make several different spectrums, and the ones that you want are S0360X, which filter out the blue and nothing else. So you can actually watch TV, watch your screen, read, do anything you want, and you just lose the bright blue. Next, breathing. Breathe deep and slow periodically. This is good to calm your brain and calm your mind. I agree with fasting frequently. Some people do better with 1 meal a day. Some people do better with a 36-hour fast once a week. Some people do a 3 or 4 day fast every quarter. I think Tim Ferriss does all 3 of those things. Let's see. Oh, yes, resistance exercise, very important. If you're traveling and not staying at a hotel with a gym, it's handy to have a couple of things that fit in your suitcase, like hand grip exercise and resistance bands that don't weigh very much. They fit in your suitcase. When you're at home, you can get a you can get a pull-up bar that fits in your doorway and can be uninstalled very easily. Or if you want to do something a little bit more elaborate and permanent, you can get a teeter hang-up bar, which lets you hang upside down with these anti-gravity boots. And that's kind of fun. Not only do you get some blood to your head, but you can do pull-ups with your legs. So pull-ups and chin-ups. I start every day with 15 deep squats and 30 push-ups and a couple of what I call cross-legged squats, which I read somewhere it tunes up your cerebellum for balance better than just a straight squat. So
isn't the cross-legged squat that thing that determines supposedly how many years you have left?
Yes, that's what I heard. So I started doing that about 2 months ago.
I'm not sure if the causality works that way, but it probably doesn't hurt.
Well, the same thing with hand grips. They say that hand grips are predictive of your remaining lifespan. I don't know if building up your hand strength makes you live longer, but it's fun. I like it.
It can't hurt. It can't hurt.
So let's see. So yes, interval resistance exercise. I guess Creon says he does his resistance to exhaustion in 1 or 2 reps. I do my resistance to exhaustion in about 15 reps. And a lot of people have these exalted ambitions that they're going to exercise a lot, hours a day or hours a week, and they never quite have time in their schedule. I say it's better to do 2 minutes of exercise every day than to have the intention of doing 2 hours, but I'll do it tomorrow. So a little bit of background, since we're all N equals 1s. I'm 68 years old. I weigh 140 pounds. I'm 5 feet 7 tall. I've never tested my body mass index, but I think I'm in pretty good shape. I get a doctor's blood test every year, so I know my cholesterol and vitamin D and everything like that is within the good range. I became a vegetarian 50 years ago, and I did it out of compassion for animals. In Sanskrit, they call it ahimsa. And later on, I found out it was also healthy, at least for me, maybe not for Creon. And if I'm going to needle Creon a little bit, I'll say don't smoke.
I'm vaping. It's good for you.
I don't agree, but he thinks so, or he claims so.
Well, I'm not sure that vaping is good for you, but I think nicotine is actually good for you, and cigarette smoke is bad for you. So I'm kind of hoping that nicotine without the cigarette smoke might be good for me.
Well, interestingly enough, nicotinic acid is vitamin B3 and helps your body to make NAD. And I do take a half a gram of nicotinic acid every day, and I think it's a good supplement to take. So I agree with you on nicotine, but not smoke. But I would take it in the form of a powdered nicotinic acid. And there are some other products on the market that raise the NAD plus levels, such as NR and NMN, but they cost 100 times as much as nicotinic acid. So for a penny or two a day, I think I'm getting the same benefits that you would get from $1 or $2 a day of NR or NMN. And if people are writing to me on the chat, I'm not going to look at it because it's going to distract me.
You go. We'll figure it out later. Don't worry.
So I do intense resistance exercise several times a week, and on alternate days I do yoga. And I think yoga has a lot of benefits from the stretching and from the standing on your head and from the balance, standing on one foot and doing headstands and things like that, I think is good for your cerebellum. And also good for your cerebellum is to practice juggling. If and when the lockdown ever ends, I do contra dancing, which is a lot of fun. And
hey, can I say something about yoga? Here's somewhere where we completely agree on yoga. I haven't done it so much lately since lockdown, but I practiced yoga really intensely for like 15 years, and I will say that the way I thought of it, which is someone told me this and it made perfect sense. Yoga is about strength, balance, endurance, and flexibility. And in a way, if you think about it, that's all you need for life is strength, balance, endurance, and flexibility.
And I would add for some branches of yoga, it's compassion.
Yeah, I'm talking mostly about body yoga. Yeah, not mind yoga.
So I learned yoga from Swami Satchidananda. Whoever's talking, I can barely hear you. Do you have a good connection?
I think Carl is trying to talk, but his connection's bad. I'll try to coordinate with him. Go ahead in the meantime.
Turn off your video, Carl.
Hello, Carl. Are you there?
It's not working.
Carl, I think you have to move your computer or call in. Maybe we really want to hear your comments, especially on. Oh, I heard something. Okay, I would say I will try to coordinate with Carl, on the sideline, and you, John, go ahead. And then we'll have Carl present after you on what he doesn't agree with you and Creon.
Okay. So I found this book by James Joseph, The Color Code, very interesting because, there we go. It talks about the phytonutrients that are in colored fruits and vegetables, which I guess Creon calls poisons, but I think they're, I'm teasing him.
Drugs, not poisons, medicines.
Okay, well, I eat a couple of pounds of medicines every day. And let me see. 40 flashes per second of light seems to stimulate the brain to get rid of some of the amyloid beta in it. So I've started working with an electrical engineer to make strobe lights, LEDs, that flash 40 times per second. And if people are interested, I can have a few extra made for you guys. Senolytics, dasatinib and quercetin, have been experimentally tried by a number of people, but apparently you only want to try it every year or two because you don't want to kill too many cells. I think I'm going to see if I can get the PowerPoint to turn on. Let me see here. Now, can you still hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Can you share my screen, or do I have to do something?
You have to share it. You have to click on the little button that says share screen below your co-host, so you should be able to do so. There's a little green button
yes,
below in the panel. It says share screen, and then you can pick. And I would pick the one that's on the left because that's usually the one, I think, where you can share your respective window.
Got it. Okay. Oh, now I have to click share. Okay.
Yep, works.
Okay. Now, is it showing people over on the side? Or are you just seeing the screen?
I'm seeing you on the top and the screen.
Okay. Let me see if I can hide this. Oh, yes.
No, this is great. We can see you really well.
Okay, good. Okay, as I say, I've mashed together a couple of presentations from last year, so dates will be different, and I'll skip over some non-relevant things. But let me see if I can make this work. That's not, let me see.
Yeah, works.
Okay. Oops, it's too responsive. Let's see here. Anyway, we've talked about exercise, resistance, aerobic, yoga. When I do aerobic exercise, I tend to do non-impact things. I don't jog or play tennis. I use a Nordic track, or I'll bounce on a trampoline. I have not banked my stem cells, but I'm thinking it's probably a good thing to do. It may be useful for future interventions, and I have not banked any baby's placenta or cord blood. I have a couple of files on the web at legendarypharma.com/JDF/nutrition and legendarypharma.com/JDF/fitness. They were written a couple of years ago, but they may be somewhat useful. Let me see if I can move to the next slide. Yes, that worked. I'm taking 500 milligrams of metformin every day. I'm not taking rapamycin. I'm a little concerned that it may have negative effects, but I know a number of people are. There are some experiments going on with some HIV drugs to try and prevent transposons from jumping around and harming our genome. That's, I'd say, still experimental, but I have taken steps to see if I can join a clinical trial at the Mayo Clinic, and I'm waiting to hear back from them about that. I talked about dasatinib and quercetin a minute ago. Some people are infusing NAD+. As I mentioned, I just take 0.5 gram of nicotinic acid, also known as niacin, also known as vitamin B3. And I take that oral. Let me try it. That worked. Okay, I talked about eating a rainbow. So different plants are different colors because they absorb different things, and they absorb different things because they have different ring structures that reflect some frequencies and reflect some and absorb others.
And so
they are good for your brain, good for your muscles, good for your health.
What, they're good for your brain because they reflect certain colors? Come on now.
No, that indicates what ring structure it is.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, I thought everybody was a biochemist. So different ring structures will absorb different frequencies of light. They also absorb free radical electrons. So one of their benefits is that they reduce free radical damage to cell membranes and mitochondria.
So you're basically saying eat a rainbow every day, but not a unicorn every day.
Correct. You got
okay, good.
And this book has recipes in it. And this is a quote from the first chapter. A low-fat diet based on fruits, vegetables, and whole grains offers the best possible diet for achieving optimum health. Populations around the world who eat in this manner, exercise regularly, and avoid tobacco have the fewest occurrences of cancer, heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, and osteoporosis. And I'll just mention this was working at the Department of Agriculture Research Center at Tufts University. So he had quite a lab of people working with him. So this is a look at my freezer. I especially to buy fresh food, and it's still handy now because I can buy 2 months worth of frozen food at a time. And you can see the colored berries and vegetables. Broccoli has some very good stuff in it. Almonds and walnuts are very healthy too. And goji berries from Tibet, and raw parsley, celery. Red onions seem to have more phytonutrients than white onions. Tomato sauce, carrots, tomatoes, citrus. If you want to read, yes, along
there. John, may I suggest that you turn up your video, just because sometimes you're cutting out. So I think either it's me or it's you, but maybe that would work better.
I think I've got my video turned off.
Oh, okay. I can still see you.
Let me try one other thing here.
No, the slides are fine. The slides are great. You're just cutting out with me.
I'm going to turn on the Wi-Fi in addition to the Ethernet. Maybe between the two of them, they'll do more.
Great. Sorry, didn't want to interrupt much, but...
Okay, let me see if I can get back to that now. Now, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Tea has been drunken for millennia in China, and there are 3 kinds that all come from the same plant, Camellia sinensis. Green tea, white tea, black tea, and pu'er tea all come from the same plant, but they're just processed differently. And they have different combinations of phytonutrients. Green tea has a lot more EGCG and catechins. Let's see. Spearmint tea seems to be good, and that's good in the evening because it doesn't have caffeine. Oregano has good compounds. Turmeric with a little black pepper to help the absorption is good. And in fact, you can sprinkle it in your morning coffee without breaking your fast because it doesn't really have measurable calories. I take vitamin D3, 5,000 units a day. What I have read is that the recommended dietary allowance of 400 units is based on 20-year-olds, and that older people absorb it less well. And I think Carl has more data on this that he'll talk about later. Lion's mane mushroom extract is supposed to be good for the brain. Astragalus extract is supposed to be good for the telomeres and dividing cells. Alpha-lipoic acid is very potent at absorbing and neutralizing free radicals and protecting the mitochondria, but I recommend that you only take this and other antioxidants after your exercise, not before, because you'll you get some benefit from the free radicals generated by exercise. So I generally exercise before I break my fast and before I take any vitamins. B-complex is important. Bruce Ames has talked extensively about the need for micronutrients like B-complex. And N-acetylcysteine is an amino acid that is in shortest supply when your body assembles the endogenous antioxidant glutathione. So once again, take that with food, but after your exercise. So some things are experimental, some things are fairly safe for everybody. Exercise is fairly safe. Avoiding harmful foods is fairly safe. When I say I'm a vegan, I'm not a Doritos vegan. So it's possible to be vegan and have a terrible diet. As I say, I have not yet banked my own stem cells, but I'm seriously thinking about doing that, even though it's rather expensive.
Do you fast, John?
Mostly partial day fasting. Almost every day I will go for about 16 or 18 hours without food. Maybe once a month I'll go 36 hours, in other words, skip a whole day. And rarely do I do more than 36 hours, but once in a while, maybe 48 hours, something like that.
Because there's one thing I'd like to point out just briefly, which connects a lot of this stuff with the stem cell banking and all this kind of stuff, is that I believe the thinking is, and this is somewhat speculative and uncertain at this time to some degree, especially in humans, although not so much in lab animals, that if you cycle fasting with feeding at the appropriate interval, which we don't know what it is for humans, but the idea is when you fast, you consume senescent molecules and senescent cells, and when you refeed, your stem cells get activated and create new fresh cells, as well as your non-senescent cells get reactivated to create fresh molecules. So it may be, to some extent, that banking stem cells is okay, but we may naturally or perhaps artificially in the not too distant future have a way to reactivate stem cells or undifferentiate cells back to a pluripotent status and get a lot of the benefits that we are expecting from stem cell banking just by changing methylation and things to put cells back in a more pluripotent state.
I agree with everything you just said. Yeah, that's true. And that's one reason I haven't rushed to bank my stem cells, because people who are on the cutting edge of the research say, you probably won't be able to make as many stem cells as you want in the near future. It's not a sure thing, but probably. Some of you have seen this flowchart that I made and have been updating every 6 months or a year. And you can find it on the web. You can download the PDF. You can have it printed in giant size for your wall. I hope that it's somewhat artistic as well as scientifically useful. It conceptualizes the many processes of aging, causal chains of events, interactions among them, and might point to promising intervention points and future targets. And if you go through that chart, you'll find that there are parallel pathways producing senescence, such as intracellular aggregates, and fasting, of course, helps to upregulate autophagy, which can eat up some of those aggregates. Epigenetics, chromatin alterations, some stem cells stop dividing or die. There are inflammatory cascades, and neuroendocrine and immune systems degrade. These are all pathways related to aging, some of which are easier to intervene in than others. And if you can see the website, it's www.legendarypharma.com/charteg.html, and that just means chart background. And the latest version so far was updated in December of 2019. And then now that I have a new computer, I'm hoping to update it again soon. So upregulating autophagy Periodic fasting upregulates LAMP2A and macro-autophagy in mice. Ana Maria Cuervo at Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx has been working on this for decades. And also, LAMP2A levels would be restored if lysosomal turnover is enhanced. It turns out that these lysosomes that are the receptacle for the macro-autophagy can get clogged up with a non-digestible stuff that we'd like to get rid of. So some of my research has centered on how can we get the lysosomes to cast out their stuff so that non-dividing cells, particularly heart muscle and brain neurons, can act like young ones again. Extracellular glycation makes collagen and other extracellular molecules stiff because they get stuck together with biochemical bonds caused by sugar in the bloodstream. Even if you don't eat a lot of extra sugar, this will happen slowly. If you're diabetic, it happens much faster. I wrote an extensive chapter on that in The Future of Aging a few years back, and you can either get the book or get the chapter 19 and read what I've written on the subject. There are some experimental drugs. These are just a few of them. SS31 is, I believe, just entering clinical trials for heart disease because it helps to rejuvenate the mitochondria that tend to go bad in old heart muscle in some people. Rapalogs are analogs of rapamycin. Rapamycin has some side effects that we don't like, so there's some experiments going on with analogs of rapamycin, which are called rapalogs.
Hey, John, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'd like to ask your opinion on the following. You've presented a lot of stuff about, let's call it pharmacological interventions, and I'm including these supplements and stuff in there, as well as some stuff about diet. I'm wondering if you might summarize your current opinion on, like, where is the low-hanging fruit for most people? I think that for most unhealthy people, the low-hanging fruit is fixing their diet and their sleep and their exercise, which go together, in my opinion, as you said. And maybe then for people who've already fixed all that stuff, these kinds of supplements and drugs, maybe there's some benefit there. But I worry that people are like, I'll just take some of these drugs and some of these supplements, and then I don't have to actually fix my lifestyle. What is your opinion?
I agree that is the low-hanging fruit, but you don't have to wait. You can do everything at once. So, for example, Allegibrium, ALT711, you can take that, you can take vitamin D, you can take various other vitamins, even while you are fixing your exercise, diet, and getting enough sleep and quitting smoking. You don't have to wait until you've gotten in shape to take ALT711 or PBT2. ALT711 breaks some of the cross-links caused by sugar in the bloodstream, and PBT2 helps to clear the brain of amyloid beta, which can cause Alzheimer's disease. When I wrote this slide, I was still thinking that you might want to infuse young plasma, but a recent paper by the Convoy Lab at Berkeley, first author Metapour, has shown that just getting rid of your old plasma confers all the benefits that you would get from getting rid of your old plasma and adding some young plasma. So now I go in twice a week to Grifols Biomat and donate 690 milliliters of plasma, and my body makes those proteins, so I'm getting newer proteins in place of the old ones that are siphoned out for the benefit of humanity, people who are in need of some particular plasma components. So this is a lifesaver for them, and it helps to, I believe, rejuvenate the cell. So I take 5,000 units of D3 a day. I do not take NMN, I take nicotinic acid. I take 130 milligrams of coenzyme Q10. I drink every morning green tea, white tea, black tea, and coffee with no milk, no sugar. But I do sprinkle in some powdered cinnamon and a little bit of black pepper and turmeric. I take that lion's mane with my other nutrients with a meal. I'll just comment that younger people have more time to wait and see what works. Older people may want to go ahead and try some riskier things, just because if they don't do anything, they're going to die of old age. But if they're really frail, they have to be very careful in what they try. So I think we're getting some repetition here. Definitions: aging as a process, senescence as a condition. Aging takes a long time. Aging includes growth and death of cells, production and erosion of bone and extracellular matrix, changes in size and shape, accumulations and losses of various substances. I'm going to skip through some of these slides rather quickly. You can go to your biology textbooks and see all the parts of the cell, but I will point out that the mitochondria are little enclosed vesicles inside the cell, and lysosomes are also little enclosed vesicles inside the cell. Perhaps they were both derived from bacteria many millions of years ago. The extracellular matrix includes collagen, which is like nylon, and elastin, which is like rubber bands. And so the elastin allows us to have some flexibility, and the collagen keeps us from falling into a puddle on the floor and holds the cells together. And within this extracellular matrix, there are scavenger cells that go around eating bacteria and parasites and stuff that needs to be eaten up and taken out, such as macrophages. There are also white blood cells that are looking for targets so that they can make antibodies to kill those targets. But with time and sugar, the collagen strands get attached together by sugar crosslinks. And this is a covalent bond, and it can only be removed by chemical means. And the ALT711 is one of those chemicals that can remove one class of those crosslinks. How are we doing for time?
You maybe want to take, how long would you need?
How about another 10 or 15 minutes? Is that too long?
If you could do it in more like 5 to 10, that would be amazing. Yes.
Sure.
And then we have a few comments by Carl, and then we open up for discussion.
Okay, thank you. So line 1 is the most prevalent of the jumping genes. So all of our cells have this line 1, which very much resembles a homegrown virus. But under certain conditions of stress, as well as aging, it will pop out of your genome and insert a copy of itself in another part of your genome, so that with time, your genome gets more and more implanted with these retroviruses, these endogenous retroviruses, which can, if they implant in the wrong spot, they can break genes, they can break promoters, etc. So they're is some experimental drugs. Some of them were developed to treat HIV, and some of which are believed to suppress line 1 mutations. And Mayo Clinic is starting up a clinical trial on that. I've applied to participate, and I'm waiting to hear back on that.
Carl has something to say to this slide, I think. Carl?
Is Carl got his voice working?
Yes, we got him back. I think. Carl, are you here?
I'm not hearing anything.
Okay, let's see if I can find Carl, because then I can unmute him.
Maybe the computer. I got the phone and the computer both going.
I'm hearing a lot of lag.
I'm hearing also a lot of lag.
Can you hear me now?
Carl? Yes, yes. Faintly, but yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So John, your presentation started off with lifestyle, but you've gone into a general overview of all of aging, and the recent slides aren't really bringing it back to lifestyle. Can you, whatever your rest of your presentation is, can you tie it to things that you're doing in your life, or is this just general aging research?
Okay, I will skip through some of these slides. As I say, this was a mashup of some presentations I made last year.
And I already had a few people ask if you could send the slides out afterwards. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to do that. And this all looks like it requires another meeting.
I'll probably edit them because some of them are out of date. So for example, this is how you donate plasma. They take out your blood, they spin it through a centrifuge, and they give you back your red and white cells, and they're mixed with saline, sterile saline. So you're donating the liquid proteins from your blood, and you're keeping your white cells, which are important for immunity, and you're keeping your red cells, which are important for oxygenation. So interestingly enough, if you go to Red Cross and donate your whole blood, you can't donate again for 2 months because it takes that long to replenish your blood cell supply. If you are donating plasma, you can donate twice a week because it takes just a few days to replenish your blood proteins. Okay, that's the slideshow. I think I made it in 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, John. Fantastic. Okay, then I think now we have Carl do a few remarks, and then we'll see whether whether we have a shouting match between John, Carl, and Creon on vegetarian versus not, and the other disagreement, or whether we can all come together to an agreement here. Okay, Carl, take it away.
All right. Can you hear me using the computer now?
Not very well.
So much, no.
Okay.
Try turning off turn off your camera, or use your phone.
This is it.
Not hearing your phone.
Can't hear you at all.
Or dial or quit and come back.
All right, so I turned my video off. Is that better?
Yep.
It is now.
Okay, so let me say a couple things, and if I start to not be hearable, somebody wave your hand or put your ear to your, somebody who's got their video on. So first of all, let me just say, I want to say there's a lot of agreement here. I totally agree with Creon on the transformative of your life, and there's just so many ways to do that because the standard background lifestyle most people have is terrible. There's lots of meta-review papers on this, talking about like what fraction of the population gets enough sleep, and what fraction does exercise regularly, and what fraction eats a reasonable diet according to various things. And it's like what fraction doesn't smoke typical cigarettes, and like the fraction that does all the things right is like 1%. It's pretty terrible. So, great for any kind of lifestyle improvements. But I also want to channel, as a just general background, take a step back from Mark. I want to channel Aubrey, who of course is not here because he doesn't really believe in this stuff, and point out that I do believe in this stuff, like John, like Creon. I think it makes a big difference, and especially for this generation, we don't know how quickly we're going to get actual life-saving aging interventions, and if this can make 10 or 15 years difference, that could make a big difference. But to channel Aubrey and reason, it's important to put a cap on the expectations around lifestyle, right? Most of the meta-analyses suggest that at most it makes 10 to 15 years of difference to lifespan. Okay, so that's just sort of a general background comment. And I think there's a lot of agreement between the low-carb, ketogenic advocates and the whole food plant-based, which tends to be low-fat and low-protein advocates, in that everyone agrees that empty junk food calories like sugar and white bread are bad, and everyone agrees, for the most part, most people agree that vegetables, ketogenic folks, are very pro-vegetables, where they for nutrients and on things like whole grains. There's obviously not enough time to go into this. I came at this from the same, had a different educational background in this area, but we both dived in, and we just ended up landing on different papers that took us down the different path. But a couple quick comments. So, Creon, at one point you mentioned that you could see the benefits right away. There's a lot of things where there's a difference in the short-term benefits versus the long-term, right? If you take steroids, you feel great right away too. But long-term health is pretty negative. Same thing for example, long-term use of growth hormones. So I think what's important is the long-term health, not how it makes you feel. And another thing that I think is important is fiber, which wasn't really talked about here. There's a lot of work showing a very strong relationship between total fiber intake and all-cause mortality. And you only get fiber from plants. So that's just two things. One other thing is an interesting area of work. So let's take a background, right? So some people say low carb, some people say low fat, low carb, low fat, low carb. Then you look at the aging community and they say, oh no, low protein is what you really, really want. And of course, if you get low fat, low carb, low protein, what do you have? You have calorie restriction, right? And so, so that's kind of interesting. It turns out that some people try to move beyond this kind of low X debate, and they started a little subfield, but it's mostly data in animals, but it's called nutritional geometry. And if you look at the nutritional geometry literature, they have tried to sort of characterize it in a multidimensional space of fraction of carb, protein, all the macronutrients. And the results there are all from animals, because you can't really do these results.
You're like fizzling out a little bit.
The optimal for lifespan is how often? The optimal for lifespan was 10x the amount of carbs as protein. So anyway, Google nutritional geometry and you can find some more of that. Okay, I'll pause here and see what else other people want to say. There's more I can say.
Please share anything in the chat as well, in case that wasn't super clear in the video.
Did you hear the last part about nutritional geometry?
Yes, we heard nutritional geometry. And John and Creon, do you want to make any comments?
Yeah, sure. I'm always good. Go ahead, John.
Creon. Yeah, well, I basically agree with everything Carl said, even though it was hard to make out some of his words.
Yeah, the nutritional geometry thing seems to me like, a potential step in the right direction for math people, but it's like, obviously, it seems to me that it's obviously going to be way more complicated. And what I mean by that is it's dynamical. It is individualized to some extent. And while, of course, you can use geometry to analyze anything, the question is how complex is the geometry and how universal is it? So it's an interesting approach. We'll see where it goes. The idea that you use that the optimum ratio of carbs to anything is 10x is absolutely absurd to me. If you do 10x carbs to anything, you're more than likely to become diabetic. At least, a large fraction of people will be. But again, it's going to be very interesting as we determine. I think what's going to be very interesting is as the genomes and microbiomes and detailed diets and detailed scheduling information comes through and we get some real big data to look at. I'm really looking forward to actual hard data, not just bullshit associational science, but like fine-grained stuff on how much is universal and how much is individual. That's really the frontier as far as I can tell, because we don't know, right? Because on the one hand, it's extremely confusing that some people say eat fiber and other people will say don't, and some people will say eat plants and other people will say eat animals. And like, is there really a fundamental disagreement about this? I mean, this is something that I got from, what's his name? Sam Harris. He's like, how can we still be arguing about what's the right thing to eat? It seems like the most fundamental question and people still argue about it. Well, there's two confounders at least, right? One is that there's all these vested interests trying to get you to eat various things, not necessarily because it's good for you, but possibly because it's good for them. And then there's the other thing that to some degree, it might actually be quite individual and not just based on your genome, but based on your microbiome, which might be based on all kinds of previous state, your age, what you've been doing, So I think we have a lot to learn. And I look forward to us learning that. In terms of the short-term versus long-term stuff that Carl was talking about, that's absolutely true. And all I can say, there's a lot to say about that. So not all I can say, but one of the main things I want to say about the short-term versus long-term is in terms of low carb, for the vast numbers of people who are suffering from metabolic syndrome and related conditions like obesity, diabetes, and coronary heart disease, I think the evidence is pretty darn clear. If you cut carbs, you're more than likely to reverse a lot of these problems. Now, maybe once you get this stuff reversed, you can add them back in. But the idea that they're beneficial seems kind of absurd to me because we didn't evolve to eat them. I mean, where were the carbs in the early humans' diet? There were no grains. There was no agriculture. We probably ate plants and carbs when it was absolutely necessary. But other than that, we probably ate the highest nutrient density foods we could find, which were animals and insects.
Oh, but apples and oranges.
You don't, people didn't grow up with apples and oranges. There were no apples and oranges. That's a modern invention.
I think if you look at primitive tribes around the world, that they're not all killing elephants and eating them. They're eating an awful lot of plants, roots and leaves and fruits.
No doubt.
Also,
no
about
doubt. People
fiber,
eat what they have to.
Also, fiber, it feeds your gut microbiome. And if you're not eating much fiber, the experiments I've seen indicate that your gut microbiome is much healthier if you're eating a lot of plant fibers. But there's one other thing I wanted to bring up while I've got the microphone. So this is something else that I learned in yoga class many, many years ago. And that is nasal irrigation. In yoga, they call it neti. But essentially, you can just take a drugstore ear irrigation bulb and turn your head upside down over the bathroom sink, and you've got some warm salt water, and you squirt it in your nose as you are inhaling, and it washes out your sinuses. And this could be particularly helpful if you're exposed to some airborne viruses, but it's it's just a good thing to do to clean out your sinuses every morning. So I had forgotten to mention that when I was talking about the various benefits of yoga.
Thank you. I loved your show and tell. It was really fantastic. Thanks for laying everything out here. I did see you with the extension band in most of our meetings.